Between the years of 1823 to 1900, a dramatic series of 5 wars unfolded in West Africa, pitting the Ashanti Empire, one of the strongest pre-colonial African empires and the most powerful empire in the Gold Coast, now Ghana, against the British Empire and its allies. These conflicts, known collectively as the Anglo-Ashanti Wars, reshaped power in the Gold Coast and ultimately led to British colonial domination over the entire Gold Coast known as Ghana today after 77 years of intense battles with the Ashanti Empire. But to truly understand those wars, we must begin earlier, with local wars, shifting alliances, and territorial contests that set the stage. In this video, we'll walk through each war, the causes, strategies, key battles, and what they tell us about resistance, empire, and power. Before the great wars that shook West Africa, there were smaller fires, fierce clashes that would ignite the long struggle between the Ashanti and the British. It began not with Europe's armies, but with rival African states, ancient grudges, and the endless lure of coastal trade. In the early 1800s, the Ashanti Empire was at its height, rich with gold, iron, ivory, and slaves. Their armies were disciplined and deadly, their kings powerful, and their influence stretched far beyond the dense forests of Kumasi. They controlled a large portion of the Gold Coast. But one obstacle stood between them and total control of the trade routes: the Fante Confederacy on the southern coast. The Fante, long allied with the British, acted as middlemen, taxing goods from the north before they reached the coastal forts. The Ashanti demanded the right to trade directly with Europeans, but the Fante refused. In 1806, tensions erupted when the Fante gave sanctuary to fugitives from Ashanti lands. The Asantehene king sent envoys demanding their return, but the Fante, with British encouragement, defied him. They refused to hand over the fugitives from Ashanti land to him. The Ashanti initially had no intentions of fighting the Fante, but this situation forced them to. The Ashanti army marched south. Thousands of warriors armed with muskets and swords swept through the Fante lands like a storm. The British watched in alarm as the Fante defenses collapsed. By 1807, the Ashanti besieged the British fort at Anomabu. Governor Torane, hopelessly outnumbered, surrendered. The Fante chiefs, their power broken, were forced to swear allegiance to the Asantehene, but peace never lasted long. In 1811, the Fante-Ashanti War of 1811, also known as the Gafante War, was a conflict between the Ashanti Empire and its ally, the Ga people, against an alliance of Fante, Akuapem, and Akyem states. The Ashanti initially won battles through open combat, but the Fante, aided by their allies, used guerrilla tactics to force the Ashanti to withdraw. Despite the tactical withdrawal, the Ashanti managed to capture the British fort at Tantamqueri. Then came 1814. The Ashanti, led by Asantehene Osei Bonsu, launched a massive campaign against the Akyem and Akuapem, who had allied with the British and the Fante. The Ashanti army swept through the hills east of Kumasi, burning towns and seizing trade routes that led to the sea. The Akuapem capital fell. The Fante were cut off from their allies. By the end of that war, the Ashanti Empire stood unchallenged across most of the Gold Coast's interior. The British and their allies had been pushed back toward the coast, their forts surrounded by a sea of Ashanti influence. But victory had its price. Thousands had died, and distrust between the Ashanti and the Europeans deepened. The British, humiliated and cautious, began plotting new alliances. They would use diplomacy, trade agreements, and Christian missions to undermine Ashanti power from within. The peace that followed was only a pause, a calm before the storm. In 1823, that fragile peace would finally shatter. The British would strike back, and the First Anglo-Ashanti War would begin. First Anglo-Ashanti War. The road to war began not with bullets, but with a treaty. In 1817, an English envoy named Thomas Edward Dupuis was sent into the Ashanti capital, Kumasi. There, before the mighty Asantehene Osei Bonsu, He signed an agreement that recognized the Ashanti Empire as sovereign over the lands between the forest and now the coast too, since the Ashanti had conquered and incorporated the Fante Confederacy to the Ashanti Empire previously. The treaty even implied that the British would pay taxes to the Ashanti for occupying their forts along the Gold Coast. To the Ashanti, this was law, sacred and sealed. But to later British governors, it was a diplomatic mistake Dupuis made, a promise they would never honor. The Fante people, Britain's coastal allies, also rejected it. They refused to be no longer ruled or taxed by Kumasi, since the British were now doing same. For years, trade disputes and border tensions simmered between Ashanti merchants and Fante middlemen. And then, in February 1823, a spark lit the fire. A Ghanaian soldier serving under the British Royal African Corps got into a quarrel with an Ashanti trader. In his anger, he insulted the Asantehene, the king of Ashanti. He mocked the Ashanti by shouting Cormentine and Saturday, a forbidden phrase recalling an ancient Ashanti defeat where an Ashanti king had once been killed. To speak those words was an unforgivable insult, a curse against the kingdom itself. Weeks later, a group of enraged Ashanti warriors captured this soldier. On the 2nd of February 1823, they executed him, cutting off his head. The act enraged the British on the coast, but it wasn't ordered by the Ashanti king Osei Bonsu. It was carried out by a militant faction within the empire. The Ashanti sent envoys to explain to make peace, but the new British governor, Sir Charles Macarthy, refused to listen. The Ashantis had never had any issues with the British and didn't ever intend on going to war with them, since they had had a really good relationship with Dupuis, the past British envoy that was sent to Ashanti land. But to Sir Charles Macarthy, the Ashanti were arrogant invaders, mere savages who needed to be crushed. He rejected their claim to the Fante lands, dismissed the Dupuis Treaty, and prepared his forces for war. He completely underestimated the might of the Ashanti Empire. In late 1823, he led roughly 500 men, British regulars, Fante allies, and African auxiliaries, deep into the jungle north of Cape Coast to crush the Ashanti. But the Ashanti were waiting. Thousands of disciplined warriors, their bodies painted and their muskets loaded, ambushed the British near Nsamankow. At the Battle of Nsamankow, the forest erupted in thunder, drums, horns, and musket fire. The British redcoats fought desperately, but they were surrounded and outnumbered. Ammunition ran low, confusion reigned. McCarthy was struck down in battle, his small army was wiped out. Only a handful survived. The Ashanti carried his severed head to Kumasi. His skull was later polished, preserved, and covered with gold, and kept as a trophy of victory which the Ashanti king and rulers would drink from. The news sent shockwaves through the coast. British forts sealed their gates. Fear spread among their allies. The Ashanti had flawlessly won the first war by crushing the British, but the war kept on for a while in smaller encounters. Finally, in 1831, both powers met to end the bloodshed. They signed the Treaty of the Pra River, setting the Pra River as the boundary between Ashanti territory and British-controlled lands. The Ashanti had proven their might. The British had tasted their first great defeat in Africa, but both knew this peace would not last. The forest still whispered with war drums, and one day they would sound again. The Second Anglo-Ashanti War. 30 years had passed since the first great clash at Nsamankow. The Pra River had become the uneasy line between two worlds, British forts to the south and the mighty Ashanti Kingdom beyond the forest. For a time there was trade, peace, and wary diplomacy, but beneath it all, distrust simmered. The British still refused to recognize the Ashanti's authority inland, and the Ashanti still remembered the humiliation of the broken Dupuis Treaty. Then, in 1863, a spark, small but deadly. A fugitive named Kwesi Gyana fled across the Pra River into British territory, accused of crimes in Ashanti lands. The Asantehene demanded his return. The British governor refused, insisting the Ashanti fugitive was now under British protection. For the Ashanti, this was more than defiance. It was a direct challenge to their sovereignty. So their warriors crossed the river. They entered British protected land to capture the fugitive themselves. To the British, that was invasion. Skirmishes erupted along the jungle border. Small detachments of British and Ashanti forces clashed in the thick forests and swamps between Dunkwa and Prasu. Muskets cracked through the mist, spears flashed in the rain, but this time it wasn't bullets that decided the outcome. It was the forest. The air itself became the enemy, thick with fever and death. Malaria swept through the ranks. Dysentery and exhaustion crippled both sides. Soldiers collapsed in the mud, delirious and gasping, their uniforms soaked in rain and sweat. Of the 400 men the British sent north, over half were dead or dying, not from battle, but disease. Even the Ashanti, masters of the jungle, suffered terribly. After months of futile marching, both armies withdrew. No cities were taken, no treaties signed. The war faded into silence, a stalemate swallowed by the forest. But in London, the defeat stung. The British now understood to conquer the Ashanti, they would need more than bravery. They would need much better tactics, medicine, logistics, and overwhelming force. And next time they promised they would come prepared. The Third Anglo-Ashanti War. By the 1870s, the British Empire's power had grown, and so had its hunger for control. Along the Gold Coast, the balance of power shifted when the Dutch sold their forts to the British, including Elmina, a city long under Ashanti protection. For generations, Elmina had paid tribute to the Ashanti, but now that gold and respect flowed to London instead. When the Ashanti demanded the tribute be restored, Britain refused. In 1873, the Ashanti king Kofi Karikari sent his army south once again, tens of thousands of disciplined warriors pouring across the Pra River, burning and raiding through Fante lands. Panic gripped the coast. The British merchants fled to their forts. London responded immediately. The man they sent was Major General Sir Garnet Wolseley, one of the Empire's finest tacticians, known for speed, precision, and discipline. Unlike the disastrous expeditions before him, Wolseley came prepared for the jungle. He brought with him nearly 2,500 fighting men, elite British regiments, the Black Watch, 42nd Highlanders, the Rifle Brigade, and the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. Naval detachments of the Royal Marines trained for amphibious warfare, experienced colonial troops, the West India Regiment, and Hausa and Yoruba troops from Lagos, hundreds of African porters and scouts from local Fante and Krobo communities. But Wolseley knew that in Africa, battles were won not by the gun, but by logistics. So he brought the Royal Engineers, the unsung heroes of the campaign. As the army marched north from the coast, the engineers carved a path through the forest, a road nearly 70 miles long, stretching from Cape Coast to the Ashanti frontier. They built bridges over the treacherous Pra River, cut pathways through dense jungle, drained swamps, and erected supply depots at every day's march. Under their hands, the impassable wilderness became a military highway. Wolseley's men marched with precision, advancing in short, well-guarded columns, each carrying rations, ammunition, and medical supplies. He enforced strict hygiene and rest to reduce the deadly toll of malaria and dysentery that had destroyed previous expeditions. The Ashanti watched silently from the forest. Then, on 31st January 1874, near a small village called Amoaful, the two armies finally met. The Ashanti, thousands strong, fought from behind thick jungle cover, firing from hidden pits and trenches. The British answered with rockets and artillery, lighting up the forest with fire and smoke. The British Black Watch and Rifle Brigade advanced with bayonets, hacking through vines under a storm of musket fire. The battle raged for hours, deafening noise, smoke, and confusion, but Wolseley's discipline and engineering advantage broke the stalemate. His well-built supply line ensured his troops never ran out of ammunition or food, while Ashanti forces, cut off and starving, began to falter. When night fell, the Ashanti retreated toward Kumasi. Wolseley pressed on, methodical, relentless. His men crossed rivers on floating pontoons, repaired bridges daily, and moved heavy guns through waist-deep mud. On the 4th of February 1874, the British entered Kumasi. The once golden capital of the Ashanti Empire lay eerily silent and empty without its people. British soldiers looted the royal palace, taking gold regalia, swords, stools, and drums. Then, under Wolseley's orders, the city was set ablaze. Flames tore through Kumasi's great courtyards and carved palaces. The sky turned red, a kingdom's glory consumed by fire. Within days the war was over. The Treaty of Fomena, signed on the 13th of March 1874, sealed Ashanti's defeat. The empire was forced to pay 50,000 ounces of gold for the damage cost of the war. The Asantehene Kofi Karikari was made to renounce claims over Denchira, Asin, and all coastal states, and open its borders and trade routes to British trade. He was also made to agree and swear to end human sacrifice. For the first time, the Ashanti Empire bowed to the British. Yet even as the British celebrated, they knew one truth. They had conquered a city, not a people. The spirit of Ashanti would one day rise again. The Fourth Anglo-Ashanti War. 2 decades after the burning of Kumasi, the Ashanti Empire was weakened, but still proud. The people had rebuilt their capital from the ashes, and under a new king, Asantehene Prempeh I, they sought peace. They traded with the British, sent envoys, and worked to restore their nation's dignity. But in London, the mood had changed. The British now dreamed of linking their colonies from the coast to the north. From the Gold Coast to the Niger, they had planned to take full control of the entire Gold Coast, and they saw Ashanti independence as an obstacle to that vision. Their excuse came easily. They accused the Ashanti of violating the Treaty of Fomena, claiming unpaid tribute and acts of defiance. The Ashanti king Asantehene Prempeh I sent peaceful letters pleading, "We desire no war. We wish only friendship and trade." But it was too late. The British wanted control, not friendship. In December 1895, a British expedition, over 2,000 troops strong, advanced from the coast under Sir Francis Scott, with Major Robert Baden-Powell as his intelligence officer. But this time there was no battle. The Ashanti army, exhausted from years of decline and disunity, could not face another war. Instead, Asantehene Prempeh I chose to surrender peacefully to prevent the bloodshed of his people. On 17 January 1896, he met the British officers at Kumasi's great courtyard, draped in royal gold and kente. He bowed his head before the Union Jack, but his words were proud. "I do this not in fear, but in hope that my people may live." The British took him, his mother, and several chiefs prisoner. Bound in dignity, they were led away under heavy guard. First to Elmina, then shipped into exile on the Seychelles Islands, far across the Indian Ocean. Britain declared Ashanti a protectorate, placing it under the authority of the governor of the Gold Coast. The Golden Stool remained hidden, untouched, unseen. The kingdom that had once defied empires now lived beneath one. But one thing remained unconquered: the soul of the Ashanti people, sealed forever within the Golden Stool. The Fifth Anglo-Ashanti War, the War of the Golden Stool, the Ashanti Kingdom had fallen. The king was gone, the British flag now flew over Kumasi, and British soldiers occupied the forts that once guarded the Golden Empire. But one thing they had not found was the Golden Stool, the sacred throne said to contain the soul of the Ashanti nation itself. To the British, it was just a royal seat of gold. To the Ashanti, it was life itself, the spirit of the people, descended from the heavens by Okomfo Anokye centuries ago. In March 1900, the new British governor, Sir Frederick Hodgson, made a fatal mistake. Standing before Ashanti chiefs in Kumasi, he demanded, "Where is the Golden Stool? Why am I not sitting on it as the ruler of this land?" He then demanded a search for it. His words struck like thunder. To the Ashanti, This was not just arrogance, it was blasphemy. The golden stool was never to be sat upon by any human, not even the Ashanti king. It symbolized the soul of every Ashanti, living and dead. Within days, the forest was alive again, with war drums. Chiefs gathered in secret councils, warriors sharpened spears and loaded muskets. At the heart of this uprising stood a woman, Yaa Asantewaa, the queen mother of Ejisu. She rose before the chiefs and said, "If you, the men of Ashanti, will not go forward, then we, the women, will. We will fight for the golden stool ourselves." Her words ignited the people. Thousands rallied under her leadership. British officers, together with dozens of their mixed-race colonial administrators, and 500 Nigerian Hausa troops they brought taken by surprise, defended themselves. They found themselves surrounded in Kumasi. The siege of Kumasi began. From March to July 1900, the Ashanti laid siege to the British fort. Cut off from supplies, the British garrison survived on dwindling food and rainwater, firing from behind sandbags as warriors attacked from the jungle. Every dawn the forest echoed with horns, drums, and gunfire. The Ashanti fought fiercely to protect the stool, not for land or gold, but for their soul. The British eventually broke the siege when relief columns arrived from the coast, led by Major James Wilcox. Kumasi was relieved, but much of the city was destroyed once again. Yaa Asantewaa and the remaining chiefs were captured later that year and exiled, like their king before them, to the Seychelles. But the golden stool, the British never found it. Hidden deep within the forest, guarded by priests and loyal hands, it remained untouched. Though Ashanti's armies had fallen, their spirit had triumphed. For the British it was victory, for the Ashanti it was immortality. The empire of gold was gone, but the soul of the Ashanti people lived on, unbroken. The empire of gold may have fallen to time, but the spirit of Ashanti, its courage, unity, and pride, endures in every heartbeat of Ghana today. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.